of our forum series. We are honored today, very honored today, to have Congressman John Yarmuth on the panel. He would join us this evening for our King holidays and to kick off the spring semester program. So we look forward to an exciting and informative program. And it's my pleasure to turn the program over to Dr. Dawson-Edwards. Thank you, guys. Enjoy.
Thank you, Sid. So Happy New Year, everyone that normally joins us for the Yearlings Club Forum series. We are excited to be back, and we continue to do this virtually for our safety. And what we've found over the last couple of months is that actual virtual has let us have more of an audience, more of a national audience. And so it's been working out nicely, even though we miss everyone's lovely faces, and we certainly miss having our guests in person. But as everyone knows, we're all kind of getting used to this, and hopefully, and maybe some of the conversation that we have today will talk about, vaccines and where we think we are and things like that. But I'm Cherie Dawson-Edwards. I am the Associate Dean for Diversity, Engagement, Culture and Climate, sorry, it's a long name, at the University of Louisville in the College of Arts and Sciences. I'm also an associate professor in criminal justice here, and I direct our social change minor. I'm super excited about our guest today. I know he is so busy, and with all the things going on in DC and in our lives today, we certainly appreciate your time, and we want to be mindful of it. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I'll introduce our guest, and then today's program is a little bit different. We normally have a panel, but we're going to just have a conversation, meaning Representative Yarmuth, you have to kind of like just have a conversation just with me. But I have questions that I'll pose, and then we have some questions that were submitted to me, and then hopefully we'll just have a kind of informal conversation about where we are in light of the King holiday and all the things of 2020, and of course all of the new things that 2021 are presenting us. So let me introduce you properly and we'll get started. So our guest today is Chairman John Yarmuth. We are super excited to have him. Chairman John Yarmuth represents Kentucky's 3rd Congressional District in the U.S. House of Representatives. Now in his 8th term, he has served as chairman of the House Budget Committee since 2019. Yarmuth has been recognized for his work to improve education, expand access to affordable health care, and revitalize manufacturing in Louisville. Born and raised in Louisville, Kentucky, Yarmuth graduated from Atherton High School and Yale University. He and his wife, Kathy, have one son, Aaron, who's owner and editor of Leo Weekly, and I'm pleased to offer our congratulations on the arrival of a new grandson. So congratulations. So we'll just move into the questions, and we'll see with the chat. If anyone's watching and has a question, please put your question in the chat, and we will try to address as many of them as we can. So Chairman Yarmuth, we were all shocked to see the violence that erupted in the Capitol. So I just want to give space in the beginning of our conversations, as I've done with lots of people in the last week or so, to kind of ask you how you are and like, what is your, I read an article, I think I saw a clip of your interview with WDRB a couple of days ago, and I know that it was a difficult and challenging experience, but how are you? And do you want to talk a little bit about that day so that your constituents, can understand what you experienced and your insight on it?
Sure. First of all, I'm not very formal, and I really don't like titles very much. So how about we just do Cherie and John? That'll be really good.
That's awesome.
So, that's good. And secondly, it's great to be back with the Yearlings, even though it's not down on West Broadway, which I have always enjoyed when I've been involved in programs there. So thanks to the Yearlings and to U of L for doing this. So it's been 10 days now since the assault on the Capitol on January 6th. I was in my office that day. I was not in the Capitol. Every member except for the Speaker of the House, the Majority Leader, and the Majority Whip on the Democratic side have offices in either the Cannon, Longworth, or Rayburn office buildings across Independence Avenue. And that's where I was. My staff was not there. I actually advised them not to be there on that Wednesday. Since the only thing that was going on was the ceremonial counting of the Electoral College votes, I didn't think there was any reason for them to be there, and understanding that there were going to be significant protests in the district. So I was there by myself. And initially, I guess it was about 1 o'clock. The Capitol Police were running down the hall and banging on the doors and saying we needed to evacuate to the Longworth building, the next one, the one that's adjacent to us. And that's because they had found a pipe bomb across the street from the Cannon building. So we evacuated. We went to the Longworth building. I was there for about 45 minutes, came back to the office, settled in to try and watch the proceedings. And then I got a message on my phone that said, external threat to the Capitol, stay in your office, lock the doors, and stay away from the windows. So I did that. And then just a minute or two later, the Capitol Police were running down the halls, banging on the doors again. And I didn't really know what they were telling us to do. So I thought I would just obey what the text message had said. So I stayed in my office. Apparently they were trying to get us to evacuate again to the Longworth building, where if those of you who have followed this understand that hundreds of people were securing themselves in the Ways and Means conference room, which is a very large room, but and that's where there were Republican members who refused to wear masks. That's where 3 Democratic members so far have contracted the coronavirus from that event. But anyway, I stayed in my office. So for the next few hours, I watched it the way the American people watched it. And all I can say is that it was the only thing I kept describing when because I was doing a lot of media from the office, was that I was just heartbroken to see the cradle of our democracy under assault by Americans who were waving American flags. They were waving a lot of other things too, including Confederate flags, which we'll get into, and that was heartbreaking on another level. But again, I never felt, except for maybe 30 seconds, I never felt personal insecurity. I never thought my life was in danger, but I knew that I had friends who were in the Capitol. I knew I had media associates with whom I deal every day who were in the Capitol, the administrative staff, the maintenance staff, all those people were there. And so I was scared to death for them. And it's something that, intellectually, I couldn't process at the time. I still have not been able to process it. So I think we're all dealing with it in more of an emotional, with emotional responses as opposed to intellectual responses. Because again, it's really hard to believe that you have people who claim to love America and who assault Americans and the cradle of American government. So it's going to take me a while. I've had a lot of conversations with my colleagues. We're all kind of in the same place. But on Wednesday, 3 days from now, we will inaugurate a new president. And I think I'm going to be there because I think we absolutely have to show resolve and support for our democracy and for peacefulness, and also support for Joe Biden, who is the legitimately elected president of the United States, and Kamala Harris, who is the legitimately elected vice president of the United States.
Well, thank you for that. It's really good to hear your firsthand experience. So, we get all of our information from various places, and certainly we are glad that you are safe, and we hope that you are also safe on Wednesday. But thank you for representing us in that way. I mean, I think we are all struggling still with the reality of what happened, even though many people have talked about, well, what did we eventually expect? You know, when we hear the kind of rhetoric that has been touted for, you know, the last several years, then there is some expectation that people are very passionate, and passion sometimes turns to violence. So, you know, there's lots that we could talk about. As a criminal justice professor, you know, I'm kind of curious about the safety aspects that exist now. I know that I've read some reports about metal detectors and how different folks in Congress feel about those, and some videos of people rejecting them as, you know, safety measures. Do you find that those additional safety measures, do you feel like they're necessary and that they are keeping, you know, the added security will keep you all safe?
I have real mixed emotions about that. We have some members in the House, particularly new members, who, in my opinion, have come to government and to the House not to govern. They've come to get attention. They've come to nurture an audience. And one of them is a self-avowed gun nut. She made a video and put that on social media about how she's going to bring her guns to the House. And she, by the way, the rules of the House prohibit guns on the floor of the House or in adjacent areas. You can bring a gun to the Capitol. Under the rules, you can keep it in your office, but you can't bring it to the floor of the House. She and others have brazenly violated those rules. And as a response to that, the Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, ordered, actually, I'm not sure it was the Speaker, I think it was the Sergeant at Arms of the House, ordered those magnetometers put in at the entrances to the floor of the House. I don't really think that was necessary, but the reaction of those members, and there are dozens of Republican members who have refused to abide by, who have just walked through, setting it off, walking around them, are just an indication of the disrespect that some of these members have for rules in general. And you know, I'm not worried about being shot on the House floor. I think that's kind of an overreaction, but the reaction of those members to these safety measures, which, by the way, you know, a number of my colleagues absolutely feel threatened, I think is disrespectful. And if you can't have basic respect for your colleagues and the health and safety and the feelings of your colleagues, then, you know, we've got to review those things. The incident where the Republican members in that secured room, when they refused to wear masks, even though they were offered them, and then three Democratic members caught the virus. Again, it's just an indication of disrespect for the rules of the road, for law and order, for things that we all take for granted. And this is something we absolutely, as a country, have to reflect on, and because we see it every day. I mean, we see the disrespect that our citizens show for each other in refusing to abide by health guidelines and safety guidelines. So, yeah, I don't think the magnetometers were really needed, but once they were ordered to be put in, we all had an obligation to comply with that. And you know, unfortunately, some of my colleagues just think that it's more important to show disrespect for the rules than to comply with them.
Yeah, you know, I often talk to people, not just in a like diversity, equity, inclusion way, but just period about the need for like empathy building in our country. Like we have this really difficult time putting ourselves in another person's shoes as them and how they would feel. And I think all of us need to build upon that. But like I like what you said when you're like, yeah, maybe you don't feel like you're being threatened, or that you don't feel like you're going to get shot on the House floor. But if anybody feels that way, if anybody is not safe and secure in their job, their job is to be there and run, our government. If you're not safe, if you don't feel safe, then you're not being the best that you can be at that. And so it just strikes me as adults, we're all adults, that we can't see that, but then we might say someone else needs to see how I feel. But it's just, to me, gotten completely out of control that people cannot put themselves in someone else's shoes as them, how they would feel. And I just feel like so much more could be, so much progress could be made if we could just take a step back and say, it doesn't matter exactly how I feel in this moment. Like, if anybody who's supposed to be doing what I'm supposed to be doing can't do their job at the best that they can do, especially, and as a, representative or someone who's a lawmaker or a policymaker, decision maker, that just baffles me, even though where we are right now in this country, like a lot of things baffle me. So yeah, thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. It's just so interesting to see what we see on TV or on social media, and then to hear, your take on it is refreshing to hear. So I want to, talk a little bit just in general. I think it's important for your constituents and just the audience to kind of hear you talk about just how we got here. And in your opinion, like, I don't know, at what moment you maybe have felt a shift. I can't even remember the moment that I felt like this feels so different. It wasn't just Donald Trump, like I think a lot of people want to place everything on Donald Trump, and certainly I believe that he has a lot to do with it. But when did things change? In my line of work, not just at the university, but I serve on a board of a national civil liberties organization. I guess I'll shout out the ACLU. I serve on the national board of the ACLU as well as the Kentucky affiliate. But in the last 5 years, I've been on the board since 2014. So in the last almost 5 years, we've had these conversations about, like, our issues becoming more politicized and people thinking we're more partisan than ever. I know that you share some of the similar thoughts for civil liberties and civil rights that I might. Do you think that issues have become more partisan, or is just everything so politicized these days?
Everything's, the country has become divided, almost in the way that UK and U of L fans are divided. It's become, politics and public policy have become spectator sports. And so what's happened, as far as I can see, is that we really don't deal anymore, or even try to deal with the nuances of public policy. We just say, we've got a jersey on and we have to be on the side of the jersey, and we have to disrespect everyone who's wearing the other jersey. And that's unlike any time that I have known or experienced in my life, which is now getting pretty long, fortunately. But that's what's happened. And that's a recipe for disaster in a democracy, because democracies, almost by definition, depend on compromise. They depend on mutual understanding. They depend on common values. And that's what it seems to me we've lost over the last few years. And yes, I agree, Trump is not responsible for that totally, but he has, unlike any other event and unlike any other individual, sharpened the lines and divided us in ways that I never thought were possible. And so to think that in 2021, that American citizens would wave the Confederate flag in the Capitol of the United States, when that didn't happen during the Civil War. That an American citizen at the Capitol of the United States would wear a T-shirt that said MAGA Auschwitz. These things are incomprehensible to me. And what there are all sorts of things. We could talk about this for hours about what has created this kind of division. There was a book that was actually published about 10 or 12 years ago called The Big Sort. And it was actually written by a Kentuckian named Bill Bishop. He now lives in Austin, Texas. He's a journalist. But it was about how in every aspect of our life, we have segregated ourselves based on politics. That, where we live, where we go to pray, all of these things. And, I watched the video of Bob Rogers' church. And I hope everybody gets a chance to watch it. And it was one of the scariest things I've seen in recent time. And I know Bob. Bob's been in my office. Bob's begged to pray with me. And to hear him say basically that he wanted to cast curses on everybody who voted Democrat was just unbelievable. So that's where we are. And I wish I had answers to how we get out of it. But again, we've become, we're wearing jerseys right now, and we won't get anything accomplished in this country until we learn to at least have empathy for those who are wearing the other jerseys. And what I've always said is Democrats, and this is strictly in an electoral sense, Democrats have a real problem. We're really good on policy. I mean, we can come up with 30-page position papers on everything and on any subject and tell everybody how it's going to be good for them. But we're not really good at conveying empathy. Joe Biden is great at it. He's the first. Even Barack Obama wasn't that good at it because he intellectualized everything. But we're generally not good at that. Donald Trump was really good at that. He figured out that there was a large segment of the American public who were so alienated and were so distrustful of government that he could basically play them. And so I give him credit for understanding that was out there. Now, does he care about those people? Heavens no, he couldn't care less about them. It was totally ingenuous, but they thought he understood where they were, and they still do. And that's why he got 73 million votes, that they believe he cares about them. He doesn't. Most everybody knows that. But until Joe Biden, we have, and still many of our candidates don't do a great job of that. But
I think I'm going to go on an empathy.
Yeah, go ahead.
Campaign.
Yeah, I could go on.
No. We can absolutely stay here. But I think I'm on this like empathy campaign. Like we have to do better, and I don't know, what else we can do. Like to me, that's the easy part. Is
I think it will get better with Trump out of the limelight and with Joe Biden as president. It's not going to cure it, but I'm pretty sure it'll get better.
Yeah, well, I hope so. So I'm going to wear my educator hat here for just a second and read this question. So the beauty of social media is that we get a glimpse into the minds of folks we might not normally interact with. I've just been appalled at the need for political education across the political spectrum. Do you see this as a moment of recognizing that people really don't know how our government works or is supposed to work, and what do we need to do about it? So I guess this is that civics education question or history, because I'm not a, historian, but my background is in public policy. Most people think I'm a criminologist. I don't claim to be that, but my background's in public policy, and I just really struggle when I see people, their comments. I'm like, no, that's not how the government works. Like, no, the president can't do that. No, the legislative body, it's like the very third grade, three branches of the government, and then federalism and levels of the government. Like, what do we do clearly this moment has let people know that there is a need for political education. I think, I just wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, so we just elected a man to the United States Senate who thought that the three branches of government were the House, the Senate, and the presidency. Yeah. And presumably he's a college graduate. He was a college football coach. So yeah, we have to do a lot better than this. One of the things that, I've actually written some stuff on this, is that with everything that's going on in the world, and as quickly as the world is changing and technology and so forth, and we're still focusing on schools and passing, standardized testing. Mm-hmm. We need to rethink the way we educate people, in my opinion, and we need to think of school as survival training. And survival training means, obviously we need to teach reading and writing. We don't need to teach knowledge anymore and facts, because you can look up anything. You just ask Siri, you get all the answers. Mm-hmm. I'm questioning, unless you're going into the serious sciences, how important math is right now, because you can ask Siri for what the answer is. But we need to teach financial literacy. We need to teach, for sure, social media literacy. Mm-hmm. We need to teach people how to process information they see online, how to vet it in their own minds, how to make sure, or at least question those things. These are the survival skills that everybody's going to need going forward, and democracy definitely needs. So yes, we do need to have better we need to have some instruction in civics. And so, I get called in any given day before the pandemic, when I was out in public, I'd be called mayor, governor, senator, congressman, virtually everything but president. People knew I was something, that I had some office, but didn't know which. The number of people who ask me about things that I have no jurisdiction over, who are dealing with state issues and or local issues, and they don't understand the difference. I don't blame them for that, but this is serious citizenship information that people have to have, and we need to do a lot better at that.
Well, I just want to shout out, we have a local group called, I think it's Louisville Political Education for Liberation. They're doing a really awesome job locally, providing virtual community education trainings. I actually did one for them, I guess it was last week or the week before, on Civics 101, like Schoolhouse Rock, this is a bill, And the audience there actually was pretty knowledgeable, but they're going to share like the information out to people who may not know. And like you said, it's not everyone's fault that we were not taught these things, or that we don't talk about them anymore. Like, you get it in third grade or fifth grade, and a little bit in middle school, and then you don't have to take anything like that, even as a college student. I mean, I teach criminal justice, and I started adding it in my senior seminar class because I realized that my students at the time that wanted to be police officers didn't understand the executive branch, the executive office, and how they were situated. But not only that, they didn't realize that they were public servants. And that is why the public can hold you accountable and expect transparency from you because of that. So I think that doesn't just play into, what's Congress, or what, or who's the president, or who's the mayor or the governor, but like, where do these public servants, where are they situated in our government structure, and why it makes sense for us to hold them accountable, just like we would hold you accountable, just like we would hold someone in the executive office accountable. So
I have to tell a quick story.
Okay.
I'll try to make it quick. Back when back in 2009, when we were debating the Affordable Care Act, and in that summer there was a huge rally in Washington, and a lot of people came, and they were mad they were all angry, fighting what we were doing, even though at that time we really didn't have a bill. But so I had two people in my office. They were both teachers in Jefferson County Public Schools. And they said to me, they were in their mid-30s. And the woman said to me, we just don't want the government to be involved in our healthcare. And I said to the couple, trying to not be condescending, you understand that the government pays for your healthcare. And she said, no, they don't. Humana is our insurance company. And I said, I understand Humana is your insurance company, but the Commonwealth of Kentucky pays your premiums. They pay for your insurance. And it occurred to me that the idea that they were actually government employees would have never occurred to them. And that fund, it's not just a question of House, Senate, presidency, and the courts. It's if you don't know how the government is actually involved in your life, then you got a serious problem. And you know, it will affect the way you vote. It will affect the way you think about your life. And you know, I've been to in probably 200 schools since I've been in Congress. And whether I'm talking to second graders or seniors in high school or college students, that's one of the things I talked to them. I said, I'm going to spend some time talking about the various ways in which the government at all levels, state, local, and federal, directly affects your life. Because when you go to the polls, you need to know that those vote, or if you decide not to vote, you need to understand how those levels of government all affect your life directly every day. And too many people don't. So that's sad, and we need to do as education systems, as political leaders, as educators, as you are, we need to do a much better job of that.
I agree. So I'm going to shift gears just a little bit because this might be my last question that I'm going to pose, but there are several questions popping up in the chat on a variety of topics. But I want to shift gears. I know that you're from Louisville. I'm from Louisville. I'm of Louisville. I went to the Brown School, so I know in your bio, it's you know the Louisville question.
I was born and raised in the old. Yeah, I was born and raised in the old Baptist Hospital on Barrett Avenue.
Okay. And I was born in Methodist Evangelical Hospital. I think it was on Broadway, but I just remember being a kid saying, I was born in Methodist Evangelical Hospital. So my question to you is about our city, right? And what we've been experiencing, over the last 8 months or so. As it relates to Breonna Taylor. I know that, it's a national issue, certainly with George Floyd, with Ahmaud Arbery, like countless names, but I know that Breonna Taylor is the name that is most often spoken in this issue because it's so real to us in this like kind of ground zero of talking about police reform, criminal justice reform, and racial justice. So I just wonder, I know that the House passed the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act last session or whatnot. What are your thoughts on what we need to do to address these issues, and what can you do, or what can you and your colleagues do from your perch to address the issues that we're facing today as it relates to justice and racial injustice?
Well, first of all, I think it is one of the most pressing issues facing the country right now, and it's going the way we deal with it. At every level of government is going to determine what kind of a future we have as a country and as a society. Most law enforcement policies, issues are state and local, not federal. We do have a federal legal system. We have U.S. Marshals, we have U.S. attorneys. We prosecute people for federal crime. But the day-to-day things that you see that have captured the headlines over the last several years are state and local issues. So at the federal level, we can do a few things. I mean, we can provide funding to make sure that all police forces have body cams, and we can mandate that they have body cams, and we can do those types of things. But ultimately, it's going to be people at the state and local level changing the culture of the police departments. And we can't write laws that are going to change that. We can't write laws that are going to keep racists out of police forces. I wish we could. I wish we could pass laws that would eliminate racism. We can't do that. But so the George Floyd Act that we passed in the House, that hopefully we can pass into law this year with a Democratic president and Democratic Senate now, we'll do those types of things. We'll set up some standards. It'll set up guidelines. It'll provide funding. But ultimately, it's going to be people on the ground, like our new police chief, people and our mayors, our governors, who are just become totally focused on changing the attitudes. And, you know, Breonna Taylor, the bizarre thing to me about Breonna Taylor was that there was racism, that people are focused on what happened at her apartment that night. And what happened at her apartment that night was probably not racist. The policemen who were there had a warrant. They made a mistake in I think in not announcing themselves. They claim they did. The evidence mostly is they didn't. They banged in the door. Kenneth Walker shot at them. They returned fire. Whether that was because Breonna Taylor was Black, I don't know. I suspect they assumed that the people that they were there with Black residents, but you don't know. But everything that happened surrounding that was so racist. What led up to it, what the lies they told to get the search warrant, the fact that the person they were looking for was across town and was already in custody, and then everything that happened since when they tried to cover it up, when they changed their stories, whatever Daniel Cameron did as Attorney General, all of that, the systemic racism, the latent racism just poured through. And so, you know, it's just, we've got so much work to do. It's not just racist cops. I mean, we've got that, but there's just so much systemic racism in our system, and it's everywhere. And I defy any person, any white person, or any non-white person who wants to argue with the fact that there's systemic racism should come to me, and I'll spend all the time that's necessary. But again, the answer has to come. It's just like, and I wrote a piece in Leo where I called the police department corrupt. And I said in that, if police officers want the respect that they usually deserve, they need to hold themselves accountable. They need to hold their colleagues accountable. Because if they don't, if there's a CYA, cover your rear attitude, then, and the secrecy and all of this, then how can you trust any of them? The only way to instill trust in law enforcement is if they hold themselves accountable, because basically they're the only ones that who know, for the most part, what happened from beginning to end of any particular incident. Now we could do things. I think, for instance, personally, and I've had police argue with me about this, but I don't think a police officer ever ought to stop a vehicle unless it is posing an imminent danger to others. I don't think you should stop a vehicle for an expired license plate. I don't think you should stop a vehicle for a taillight out, for making a wrong, not signaling. All of these things that generally lead, that have in many cases lead to hostile encounters, and for no reason. And we know that the vast majority of those traffic stops are made of Black drivers. White drivers don't get stopped like Kevin Cosby did for making supposedly making a wrong turn. So I think there are policies that we can institute at state and local levels that help eliminate some of the opportunities for the racist implementation of policing that we see. But again, ultimately, it's changing a culture, and we need to do a lot better vetting. I think it's my understanding that Officer Hankinson, when he was left the Lexington Police Department, had a do not hire notation on his record that never was transmitted to the LMPD. It's those types of things that we just can't let happen. So anyway, we get to, again, every one of these subjects we could talk about for an hour, but.
So I'm sorry, I'm on campus and my heater just started making like a siren noise. So I was like, I can't stay in here, but I was listening, and thank you for that.
You made a good shift. You made a good shift.
I had to move to the next office beside mine, so I apologize, but that's our virtual world. So yeah, I think it's so important for us to have those conversations, and certainly, when we talk about systemic racism, I know that some people struggle with the concept because they still want to say that it's a racist police officer, like a racist did that. But when you operate in a system that upholds whiteness or white supremacy, which policing has always done that. This is where I will wear the criminal justice hat. You can't deny that even if that person didn't bring that with them into the system already exists that way. And it doesn't mean that it's intentional, like you said, like, did the officers have intention to, do anything racist, or seemingly racist that night? Perhaps not, but the whole setup and everything that involved it, and the unconscious bias and fear and feeling threatened by people of color, or that we're more criminal or more dangerous or aggressive, that's all about, white supremacy and systemic racism, and so maybe they didn't target her because of her race, but certainly racism has a lot to do with how things like that happen.
Exactly. And let me say another thing. And this is what we can do at the federal level. We've got to change the federal drug laws. Mm-hmm. We absolutely have to do that, because so much of this relates to drugs, and the Breonna Taylor case related to drugs. We have hundreds of thousands of men and women, predominantly Black, in prison in the United States for doing something that is now legal with virtually illegally half the country. And that doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't.
I'm convinced that Joe Biden is going to work on that. That we're going to schedule marijuana, so it won't be a Schedule I narcotic on the same level as heroin. The idea that Mississippi, I'll kind of localize this. The idea that Mississippi this year legalized medical marijuana and Kentucky hasn't. Is just mind-boggling to me. I don't know what these people in Frankfurt are thinking. I've told this to Democratic politicians, if you're a Democrat running for any office and you're not for legalization of marijuana, including recreational marijuana, you're committing political malpractice because you don't lose one vote as a Democrat. Right. Now, Republicans are different, but as a Democrat, you don't lose one vote, and you bring all sorts of new voters into your camp. And there were 5 elections on marijuana last November. Everyone it passed. In Arizona and Mississippi, these are not liberal states. And then we go to work expunging the records of everybody who's in jail or has been in jail for possession of marijuana or using marijuana. If you've got big dealers who've been dealing illegally, that's different category. But again, literally hundreds of thousands of predominantly Black men and women are in prison for doing something that is legal in most parts of the country right now.
Yeah, I remember, I guess it was almost 8 years ago or so, the ACLU put out a report on racial disparities in marijuana arrests, and they did it by state. And then, of course, they went by county, and I think there was a Northern Kentucky county, it was Louisville, things like that. And then the following General Assembly session, they did some kind of reform where, personal possession was more like an infraction, more like a traffic ticket, and so, the thought that we decriminalized it, that long ago, as to like, even if you possess it, it's like a ticket, is so close to legalization that it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me from a policy standpoint that it would be that close. And so you're right, they really need to think about what that means, and how regulation could benefit us. I know Colorado for sure. I remember one year they had so much excess money from their regulation that they were able to like provide grants for something. I don't remember the exact thing, but like just forward thinking and implications of things. I think we've got to get out of this mindset of this is the way it's always been, and this is your brain on drugs. And I'm not by any means saying, oh, everybody go use marijuana, but it's the reality that the perception and the knowledge that we have about certain things has changed over time, and that's certainly one that can benefit a lot of people, especially from a medical sense. So absolutely.
And it will take away one of the driving factors in discriminatory policing and law and justice in this country. And that's a really critical thing to consider.
Yeah, and I was going to say this before my heater started making that noise. You were talking about the tail lights and those type of pretext stops, and I think that in criminal justice actors say, well, the Supreme Court said, because I wrote my master's thesis on racial profiling. So in 1996, in Wren versus United States, the Supreme Court upheld, pretextual stops, which is that tail light kind of thing. But police departments, the Supreme Court ruling is saying what you can do, doesn't say what you have to do. So your practice and your policy is local. Right. You can say, no, we're not stopping people for that. That's totally in the purview of the local, police department to decide in their practices and their policies how to apply it. So I think, the more people know about that, the more we can advocate for change. And I like your point to clarify that there's only certain things you can do as a representative at Congress, where there's lots of things that we can push for in our local and state politics and policies that can change things for the better. So my last question
in DC, speeding tickets are given. You're speeding, a camera catches you, takes a picture of your license plates, and sends you a ticket. So they don't stop you for that.
Yeah, well, we're not even going to go into like reallocating resources and what the police don't have to do and what other things can do in place of them. Well, we'll save that for our live topic. When we meet live one time, we'll talk about that. So my last question has to do with the incoming Biden administration. It's just a very general question about like, what do you think with the change in the Senate and the change in the presidency? Like, what are some of the legislative priorities under or during an administration like the Biden administration in your mind?
Well, I think he's laid out a pretty aggressive agenda in many ways, and everything from investing in infrastructure, in education, expanding healthcare. Virtually everything you can imagine, he has a position on and a program. I think what you're going to see is initially you're going to see a lot of reversals of Trump policies that Trump used executive orders to do. I think it's been in the news the last couple of days that he's going to sign 12 executive orders on day one, reversing Trump policies, everything from the Muslim travel ban to extending the moratorium on evictions and student loan payments. So, I think he's clearly focused on, I think initially anyway, getting a handle on the COVID pandemic and trying to ease the economic stress that so many in the country are facing because of the COVID pandemic. We'll be right with him in Congress. The Democrats will be. Hopefully, some Republicans will get on board as well. I think what I would say is most important is that I think Joe Biden is focused almost like a laser beam um, on disparities in society, wealth and income, education, healthcare. That the frame through which he views any particular issue is this. We talked about systemic racism, is the systemic discrimination or partiality, because sometimes a lot of this was not intentionally discriminatory, but it ended up being. And I think that's the prism through which he sees almost any issue. And that's really important, and I think really hopeful.
Absolutely. So you brought up, you used the example of like the Muslim ban, the Muslim travel ban, and then again brought up systemic racism. So I'm going to ask this question from the Q&A that says, thank you for this conversation. How do we include our immigrant community in this conversation on systemic racism and colonialism? For instance, there's 150 languages plus in JCBS schools, such an intersection of race and immigration. There's potential for continued solidarity, potential voters too. And it says peace from Sophie and her mom, Donna, and love to the Brown School. Go Brown School Bears.
Yeah, I had a nephew at the Brown School, so, you know, I love the Brown School. I will say that, you know, the Biden administration has already committed to trying to get doing comprehensive immigration reform. I'm proud to have worked on it, being one of what we called the Gang of Eight back in 2013, who worked for 7 months to get comprehensive immigration reform in the House. We actually came up with a plan which we think could have passed the House, and unfortunately, John Boehner, who was then Speaker of the House, would not bring it to the floor. It had already, something like it had already passed the Senate. So we had a real chance to solve a lot of these problems back then, and unfortunately we didn't. So, you know, I think what Joe Biden will do is to make the case, which, and that's the important thing. You have to make the case for immigration reform, because, you know, there are a lot of people out there, and there are most of them were Trump supporters, who think that immigration, letting people into the country, is a bad thing. And I think what Joe Biden will do is make the case that it's not only that it's economically beneficial to the country and not detrimental to the country, and that it represents the greatest traditions of our country, and that we will all benefit by an immigration policy which lives up to the inscription on the Statue of Liberty. You know, we all, anybody who's been in Louisville is I think pretty much has encountered our refugee population. Louisville's been an incredibly welcoming city for refugees. We've done a great job in resettling them. One of the most meaningful days of my service in the House was welcoming 2 families from Syria at an event at the Turkish American Center. And there were like 2,000 people there to welcome these 2 families. It was, these were everybody. I mean, it was the most diverse group possible, but everybody just threw their arms collectively around these 2 families. And these families have become among the most productive and wonderful contributors to our community. So I think that's the attitude Joe Biden has. That's the attitude I have. And again, you can make an argument, an economic argument, that it's in everybody's best economic interests to allow more people into our country and not fewer. So I look forward to helping President Biden with that effort.
Awesome, thank you. And then we have a question from Haley that says, how do you think the teachings of MLK continue to influence society and politics?
Well, I think the lessons of MLK are timeless, I think they acknowledge not just the progress we made, but the struggle that we have always had and continue to have. And we see it, the struggle, we saw it Wednesday a week ago and at the Capitol, and we see it in so many other ways. I think one of his most famous quotes about the arc of justice, the arc of justice is long, but the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. I think is a constant recognition that it doesn't bend by itself, that we all have to work to bend it, but that it is much more of a gradual process than it should be. People ask me all the time. I had a great conversation several months ago with Reverend Awkward, and who is has become a good friend, and we talked about it. I said, ultimately, we're going to breed our way out of this problem. There aren't going to be, everybody's going to be biracial and multiracial, like Kamala Harris. A couple of generations from now, there won't be any white majority. So, but in the meantime, we have to realize that the all men created equal declaration in the Declaration of Independence is what we all have to have as our foundational thought, our foundational belief, and we have to be better at speaking out in repudiation of those who claim differently.
So I do have one more question. So I was looking at the chat. There were some questions in the Q&A. That's the challenges of navigating Zoom. And this actually talks about the stimulus package. So I know we didn't really touch on COVID and just the pandemic and the impact that it had, because that's a whole different conversation. But this one kind of draws in the concept and ideas of racial justice and reparation and things like that. And so this Donovan asked, what about a stimulus package particular to Black communities? Has there been any conversations or thoughts about how something like the COVID pandemic has exacerbated problems for communities that were already suffering from problems?
I'll answer that in two ways. This is something that's very much on Democrat members' minds and has been for a long time. So there are two issues. One is we know that there have been, for instance, disparate impacts of COVID on Black and other non-white citizens. They've suffered more, they die more frequently. And so we have the package that we passed in December has some response to that. At least we hope it's a response to that. It's more funding for community health centers where more Black Americans get healthcare than others. And so, yeah, we're working on it that way. The other one is the question of reparations and economic stimulus. So in the first bill that we passed last year, the CARES Act, where we had a huge amount of help for small businesses, very little of that assistance ended up going to minority business people. In the second bill that we passed it in May, and then we passed it in October. The Republicans wouldn't pass it. Carved out a piece of that business support for minority-owned businesses, and so we're working in that way to make sure that just the people with strong banking connections and so forth don't get all the help. What we're going to need to do, in my opinion, and this kind of borders on reparations, but I don't want to get into that discussion right now, is, I think we need to have maybe a $200 billion minority business incubator fund, which would be a lot of money, which allows small business people who don't have ready access to investment capital to get favorable interest rates on a loan that from the government, where they can go and set up a beauty shop. They can go up and set up a restaurant. They can do a cleaning service. They can do a construction company, whatever they think they're thinking about doing. Because ultimately that's the way we help build wealth in Black communities, which is, I think, one of the critical priorities, should be one of the critical priorities of country. If you have 13 to 15% of the population of the country that has average net worth that is 1/10 or 1/15 of what white families have, that's not a sustainable proposition. And government, I think, has an obligation to do what it can to solve that. And I think there are ways we can do it. We can do it with housing. We can do it again with business incubator funds. Yes, we can do it with direct payment. Politically, that's a little tougher to do, but I think that's what we need to focus on. And so, yes, in the relief packages we're going to be working on, and I think that the President Biden just proposed a $1.9 trillion relief package. We're going to make sure that that has those kind of set asides, those carve outs, so that it's guaranteed that relief and help goes to Black families. And then looking down the road, some more ongoing programs to again, create wealth in the Black communities, which again, we absolutely have to do.
Thank you for that. So I think we're about out of time. We normally do this for an hour and a half. And if I'd known that we were going to have such a robust conversation and a bazillion other things that we could have covered, I would have taken up another 30 minutes of your time. But are there any final or closing remarks or words of wisdom or encouragement? I mean, I know, like we said, you experienced what you experienced in the nation's capital very recently, and you're still processing those things. But is there anything that you want us to know or hear before we depart?
I guess one thought I would leave you with, and it's something that I try to talk to people about all the time, is the federal government is important, and we're going to keep struggling to do what we can, but the things that impact the daily lives of my constituents are things that happen in Metro Hall, and they happen in Frankfurt. And so in your political efforts, in terms of focusing on elections and then also in lobbying, advocacy, spend more energy focusing on state and local bodies, because that's where the things that happen every day that affect your lives much more significantly than what happens in Washington. And what we're seeing in Frankfurt now with a super majority of Republicans, and I don't want to be overly partisan, but we're in a legislative session now in Frankfurt, and it seems all they want to do is strip Andy Beshear of his power and do other things that have absolutely no impact on your life. And so it's the question of, why are you there? What are you doing to make anybody's life better? And I haven't seen one piece of legislation yet in Frankfurt that will make anybody's life better in any way. And that's scary. That's scary. I mean, coming from the majority party, there are a lot of Democratic proposals that would make a lot of people's life better. But so Andy Beshear wants to send out $300 more a week, I think, tax. I forget exactly what it is. Push for that. Mm-hmm. Get on the legislature. Tell them what's wrong. You don't have, I will say one other thing. We've had arguments in Washington a lot about how to fund SNAP, food stamps. Mm-hmm. And there's a kind of a perception that food stamps is a program that largely benefits minority citizens. In Kentucky, there's 6 congressional districts. Out of the 6, my congressional district, which has the only significant Black population in the state, and Hispanic population as well, has the smallest utilization of SNAP of the 6 congressional districts. Nationwide, 85% of SNAP benefits go to white Americans. Hal Rogers, who represents a lot of Appalachia, 27% of the population in his district, which is 95% white, or maybe even more, are SNAP beneficiaries. So, you know, there are all these crazy things out there that actually help white people more than Black people. And we still can't get support from them, from our leaders. It's bizarre. So I think, again, if you're going to spend your energy, your time, and even your political contributions advocating with politicians, do it at the state and local level, because you can have a much greater impact there than you can in Washington. So I'll leave you with that. And,
thank you so much.
And thanks for having me. I've enjoyed it a lot. Again, I have a great deal of respect for the Yearlings. You know, I'm actually sort of on the faculty at U of L, because I now co-teach a course on Congress every Tuesday and Thursday with Jasmine Ferrier. So
Okay.
I feel like, you know,
You're
I'm
one of us.
One of the team. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I've very much enjoyed our conversation. I've never had the opportunity to have a conversation with you before. I will say that at one of the rallies or protests or marches and over the summer, I took my 14-year-old and you were there. It was the one that started in the Highlands, and we marched down to the square, and my son had been asking me to take him to something, you know, he just needed to be involved. And I remember hearing you speak, and I explained to him, he's like, I know that person, who is that? I mean, he's one of those people who knew you were somebody. And so I certainly, you know, explained who you were. Like, he understands government, luckily. But yeah, I just want to thank you for what you do and how you represent us. You know, there's a lot of times when I'm outside of Kentucky that people are like, you're from Kentucky, and they're talking about, you know, people who represent us, you know, in our capital, and they don't represent people that look like me. And I feel like that you do. So I want, as an individual constituent, I want to say thank you for what you do for us.
Thanks, Cherie. Tell your son hi for me.
I will. And on behalf of the College of Arts and Sciences, Office of the Dean, and the Office for Diversity, Engagement, Culture, and Climate, we are honored that your schedule permitted you to join us this evening. Thank you for your time, and thanks to our audience. And I apologize for not getting to all of the audience questions, but thank you for joining us this evening. Please mark your calendar for our Black History Month program on February 21st. Have a good evening. Thank you so much, John.
Absolutely, Cherie. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.